In brewing coffee, there can be 1,001 different factors to be considered, and that can all feel very overwhelming. Well, as a person, I happen to like simplicity. Also, across many years of brewing coffee, I've come to realize that there's quite a lot of noise in the coffee brewing space. So today, I want to bring Occam's razor to coffee brewing and break it down to the simplest factors that we really need to be thinking about. In this video, we're going to be talking about 3 key essentials that will get you a great cup of coffee that can be brewed at home. If you're new here, my name is Tim, and I love the art and science of brewing coffee. And I also love sharing it with my friends. Over the years, there have been many of my friends who have been interested in getting started in brewing coffee, and they've all asked me the same few questions. And so, I'm making a video series sharing everything I know about coffee brewing, from a friend to a friend. Alright, let's get started. 3 key essentials to get you a great cup of coffee at home. Number 1, what you need to start with is good coffee beans. Now, what do I mean by good coffee beans? I would say that this starts with the perspective that coffee beans are an agricultural product. So when we're thinking about good coffee beans, we would be thinking about 2 primary things. Number 1, roast date. What coffee beans are is that they are seeds of a coffee cherry. So it's a fruit and coffee beans are the seed. That seed is pulled out from the flesh and then it's roasted, and so that very much makes it an agricultural product. And as we all know, agricultural products tend to have shelf lives. The key idea here is that roasted coffee contains many aromatic compounds. When it's exposed to air, these aromatic compounds begin oxidizing. And the total amount of aromatic compounds in the coffee begins to deplete as time goes on. So yes, coffee has a shelf life. So the longer time the coffee has been out of the roaster, the more its flavors have deteriorated over time. What a roast date is, it states when the coffee was roasted and how long ago it was roasted, so we get an idea of how long it's been sitting out. So if we're buying coffee that does not have a roast date on the bag, then we would have no idea when it was roasted, and chances are it's been sitting on the shelf for months on end. The takeaway here is that when we're looking to buy coffee beans to brew at home, we would want to look for coffee that has a roast date on the bag. For a start, a roast date within a month is pretty alright. Not anything more than 3 months, I would say. That would be kind of dubious. I don't think that would sell. I don't think you should be paying money for that. The other idea about getting good coffee beans is the idea of provenance. Provenance is a term that comes from the wine industry, and essentially it has to do with the details and specifics of the coffee's origin. And so with provenance, we're thinking about details like country of origin, region of the country, what varietal that coffee was, what farm it was farmed in, which year it was harvested in, what processing method it was made, which micro lot within the farm. There are all of these details that can be tracked and logged. The application here is that the more specific details you have about a coffee bag in your hands, chances are this is a product that has been produced with care and attention to a higher standard of quality. And so we want to be paying attention to the coffee bags that we are purchasing. Does it tell you a lot, or does it generically say 100% Arabica? Because that tells us really nothing. Maybe to share a bit more of what that might look like for you. This is a bag of coffee that I just received recently. It's from a roaster called Le Cabra from Denmark. Now this is a coffee from Rwanda. On the lid here, it gives details like the producer, the varietal, the roast date, the process, the kind of expression that they think the coffee tastes like, and they do give a best before date as well. I've quite enjoyed coffee from this roaster for a long time, and I've been subscribed to them for a while. With each subscription order that comes, they would send a little card and a little QR code that would lead me to their website where I can read more details about the coffee that they have sent me. I do understand that this brand works quite closely with the farmers that they purchase coffee from, and they roast the coffee and then they send it out to their customers. So that's a little bit of more story and a greater idea of provenance behind the coffees that we drink. So, in summary, when we're looking to brew great coffee, we gotta start with good coffee beans. When you're buying coffee, pay attention to see whether there's a roast date on the bag. If there is a roast date, ideally it is within a month, a couple of weeks off from roast. That would be great. We also want to be paying attention to provenance, what country it was from, what processing method it was processed with. And over time, if you're in it for the long haul, essentially, even if you don't do it consciously, you'll be building up memory bank or a data bank of different coffees and where they're from and what they tend to taste like. And that's very good in the long run. Number two, key essential number two, get a good grinder. For anybody who is interested or starting to be serious about brewing their own coffee at home, this would be one of the first things that I recommend they get into. Again, for this point, there are two main reasons why I would encourage someone to get a good grinder. Number one, getting a grinder allows you to grind on demand. As I mentioned earlier, coffee contains a lot of aromatic compounds and they oxidize over time. When coffee beans are grounded, that dissipation or that deterioration of aromatic compounds and flavors from the coffee becomes exponentially higher. That's why it's common practice for us to only grind the coffee beans right before we want to brew it. And that essentially ensures that we have locked in all the flavors until the point we need them to be released into our cup of coffee. Now, I know that with many beginners, there is a hesitation to invest into a grinder very early on, and they're more inclined to buying pre-ground coffee from our favorite coffee shop. The downsides of that is that after the coffee is ground, the flavors begin to dissipate very quickly, and maybe like in about a week after you have purchased it, its flavor potential has deteriorated to a very great extent, and you just wouldn't be tasting the coffee that you really enjoyed at the cafe, which made you purchase the bag in the first place. So that would be a bit of a compromise there. Okay, maybe you are convinced about purchasing a grinder. And I would stop us right there to say that not all grinders are made equal. In recent years, the coffee industry has really developed to begin looking quite deeply at how grinders are designed. Coffee grinders grind coffee with these things called burrs. What burrs do is that they cut up coffee beans into smaller little particles, and a lot of research has gone into the shape and the geometry of these burrs to create differences in the cutting of the beans and, as a result, differences in the cup. So having a good grinder with good burrs helps us to get desirable characteristics in the coffee that we would brew at home. It gives us greater sweetness, greater clarity of flavor, lower bitterness, no astringency or that dryness on the tongue that's not so desirable in our coffee. The takeaway for this point is this. Assuming that we are not delving into espresso just yet, I would say that it's really good to consider purchasing a hand grinder to start with. Something like this. So this is a hand grinder where you can put the beans in and you can physically grind the coffee and then it comes out as grounds in the bottom. So getting a good grinder for our coffee is very important. The third and final key essential for getting a great cup of coffee at home is good quality water. Now, this is usually where I start to lose people a little bit, but about a decade ago, a man named Maxwell Kelowna Dashwood competed at the world stage of the barista competitions with his research saying that the water that we brew coffee with significantly and profoundly affects its flavor. Since then, there has been a lot of developments in different researches and views about how coffee brewing water affects flavor. Without getting too geeky or too nerdy, the TLDR is this. Water participates in the coffee brewing process in an active manner, and if water comprises, they like to say 98.5% of your cup of coffee, then what's in the water really plays a part. So essentially, the chemical composition of the water that we use to brew coffee is very significant. We're talking about general water hardness, we're talking about alkalinity, we're talking about the proportion of compounds like magnesium, calcium, bicarbonate, things like that. When brewing coffee, it is helpful to have some ions in there which will help to pull out the soluble compounds, the good tasty stuff that we want into our cup of coffee. And so some compounds are needed. But on the other end of the spectrum, if we have too much compounds, then it prevents coffee from extracting well. So I think it's really about striking a balance between water that is too hard or too soft. When we use coffee that is too hard, you get undesirable tastes like chalkiness or completely flat and no acidity, or we aren't tasting any of those interesting taste notes that we know coffee can bring about. And so the benefit of using good quality water for brewing coffee is that we get better flavors in the cup. We get a greater vibrancy, a greater clarity of tasting notes, more fruit flavors that come out because the coffee has been optimized with better brewing water. The application or the takeaway from this is that if we're brewing coffee at home, we want to make sure that the water we're using is suitable or acceptable for brewing coffee. That's not too hard or not too soft. And so if you've been brewing coffee for a long time and you're not tasting any of the things that the bag says that you should be tasting, or your coffee is just not satisfying, then chances are it might be that your brewing water is not so good. Well, if you're like me and you live in Singapore, actually our tap water is pretty decent, but I still use a better water. In recent years, there has been quite a variety of commercial products that have allowed people to customize or personalize the kind of coffee brewing water that they use at home. The one I use is called Aquacode brewing water. In one box of Aquacode brewing water, they give sachets of mineral that are to be added to distilled water. So what I do is that I buy distilled water in bulk and then I add the Aquacode minerals into the distilled water and then I use that specifically for coffee brewing. Bruh. Yeah, that's why many of my friends think I'm crazy. I've actually trial run it with my friends and did a blind tasting of coffee that was brewed similarly in terms of recipe, grind size, and coffee beans, just using different waters. And I've had non-coffee drinker friends who were able to very distinctly tell the difference between the two, citing that the coffee that was brewed with Aquacode brewing water is tastier and better than tap water. So make what you will of that, but the bottom line is water, coffee brewing water, plays a critical role in getting you to a great cup of coffee brewed at home. And so that's the end of the video. To get a great cup of coffee at home, we want to have three things. We want to have really good coffee beans. We want to have a good grinder that will help us get real nice, even, consistent grinds. And we want to get good quality brewing water for our coffee. At this point, if you're wondering, hey wait, Tim, you've gone through the 3 points, how come there isn't a coffee brewer that we would need? I would say with these 3 key essentials, then the brewer that you're using matters a little bit less. Whichever brewer you happen to have or you happen to choose, if you have good coffee ground with a good grinder and brewed with good water, chances are the cup that you would end up with is gonna be pretty decent already. So yeah, that's about it from me for this video. If you had any thoughts, any questions, or any comments about how crazy the coffee brewing water is, you can let me know. But yeah, if not, I'll see you in the next one. 街はきらめくパッション